Welcome to Fundamental Freedoms. I'm David Sabine. I'm broadcasting from my home in Ontario.
And I'm Steve Burgess. I'm broadcasting from my home in southern Utah.
Please like and subscribe and follow us at fundamentalfreedoms.locals.com or at Facebook or YouTube. You'll find us as well. And Steve and I, we do this ad hoc occasionally. There's no schedule per se, so please be sure to hit that subscribe button and then you'll be notified when we go live.
So good society is based on good conversation and honest debate, and that's what we're all about, fundamental freedoms. We believe that it's okay to come to a conversation not prepared to do battle. It's okay to change your mind, and it's okay to have great respect even for those that we may disagree with, and that's what we're out to prove on at Fundamental Freedoms.
So this evening we have a guest. His name is Dave Shearer. We're going to hear about him, from him, and I'll bring him on screen here so he can introduce himself. And here we go. Dave, here we see you, I think. Here you are. And if you wouldn't mind, please maybe just share a bit of backstory about how it is that you and I, how it is that you've come to be in conversation with us tonight.
Well, that is pretty clear. We have a sign on our place of business. We have a little gift shop in southern BC. And even though we've had the wall here installed for close to 10 months, the sign itself did not take launch until within the last month here. The sign that has gathered attention, of course, is that we encourage that masks are prohibited in this building. And there's quite a bit of information that underlies that claim.
Thank you. So, Dave, I want to get into that throughout our conversation. And so thanks for the introduction. What I'd like to do, though, is so this is part of our speaker series, Fundamental Freedoms. And Steve and I, we've set up a format wherein, with our guest, we each ask our guest a fundamental question. And we have a couple of ground rules. And so what I'm going to do is pass it over to Steve to share those ground rules for our conversation and to ask your fundamental question. And then, Dave, those questions that Steve and I have are going to hopefully form a kind of frame for our conversation for the next hour or 45 minutes or so.
So, ground rules, we try and discourage any unidentified or undefined theys. So if we get using the word they, we just want to make sure that we understand who exactly we're talking about. The other one is that we represent ourselves. We aren't necessarily speaking on behalf of any organization or group, and that's basically the ground rules. We just like to have a great conversation. We take plenty of time to fully develop the ideas and give everybody lots of opportunity to speak and to work through, unpack things. So my fundamental question is, I think, fairly straightforward, but kind of open-ended. Dave, appreciate having you. As I thought about it, and admittedly, I don't know you well and don't know a lot about the background of the situation, but certainly all over North America, we're dealing with all kinds of different levels of mask mandates and stay-at-home orders, et cetera. And so you've taken kind of a novel approach as far as, and it's garnered a lot of attention because it's kind of the opposite of what you see on the doors of most business establishments right now, obviously. And so I guess my question would be why this particular stand? Why did you choose this method or this way to communicate what what you're communicating.
And then,
So that would be mine. So you can stew on that, David.
yeah, so Dave, my fundamental question that I hope to explore throughout the conversation with you is, you have significant education and experience, and among all the people that I think have done significant reading on the subject of the efficacy of masks and the practice of mask wearing, I think you've done the most among anyone I've been able to speak with personally, and you've curated a significant body of literature that hopefully we'll share a little bit, and we're going to provide links to the documents that you've curated. My fundamental question, and by the way, based on that research, you've formed quite a confident, I think, and informed position on the matter. And there are others that have created an informed position that is counter to yours. And my fundamental question is this: what would you need to see from the other side of this debate to persuade you that your current position is inaccurate or wrong, and that maybe they, the undefined they, who have done that research and come to some informed opinion counter to yours, that maybe they are correct? I'd love to hear, what would you need to see from that? What evidence would you need to see to persuade you? So that's hopefully the frame for our conversation. Dave, take it away.
Okay, well, first and foremost, I would choose Steve's question first, because Dave, yours is so complicated. There is so much information behind it, whereas Steve's can be defined and operated and concluded in short order. So I would preface Steve's answer by first giving you a little bit of a background with what's going on in BC, which will help you to understand the situation as a whole. What's happening here in BC is there's a growing body, a growing list of stores and establishments that have labeled themselves as mask exemption friendly. So having said that, we will still maintain and stand by our more firm stand in that we encourage that masks are prohibited. We will never turn anybody away, but we encourage that. And so to answer your question more specifically, goes into my formal training, in that I've been trained as an emergency medical technician ambulance. And so I first started looking into just what's going on when you have a globe of people all of a sudden running around with a mask on, which is definitely a very curious and odd circumstance, to say the least. So initially, I'm covering a couple of key points from an EMT's perspective. I had to go from there over to, is there a basis behind exactly what's going on? And then if you can find that, then the next step is efficacy. And so to give you an idea of what that is, if I'm going to make a stand like that, then I have to be pretty sure that I'm not actually causing harm by taking it. I know why I'm taking it. I know the dangers of the situation, but I still have to be sure on the other side that I'm not doing any harm. And so for that, I went straight to the granddaddy source, and that happens to be the Centers for Disease Control, USA. And the document can be found on our Truth Center tab, which you can show later. It's just a document like this that I assembled, and to make it even more pertinent, I went there just a few hours ago and updated it from the document that's on the website now is February to October inclusive, and the one I've updated brings it right up to today, and the figures haven't really changed much between the two. So I want to make that point, and I will put the updated one on the net as well. So what does this document mean? Well, it's a list of the all deaths relating to this virus and a number of other comorbidity circumstances across 6 categories. And quite frankly, there's really nothing within that document that even indicates there's anything going on, let alone anything close to a pandemic. Now, these are just the numbers that I've brought up directly from the CDC. Anybody can do it. When you look at my document on the net, you will have the address there that will zoom you right to that document if anybody wishes to verify it. So for now, without having that document or going through arduous numbers and details, I'll just have to leave it at there is nothing close to a pandemic there. So the next thing, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you if you're on a flow there, but I do have a question.
Yeah.
So what would you say to the folks that would argue that there doesn't appear to be a pandemic in those data because we're taking such extreme measures to lock down and protect people? And isn't that a sign that it's working?
I'm glad you asked that, and of course I've thought of that already. My next statement was going to be on efficacy, and I have a document here behind me somewhere, but it's not really going to help because I can't really show it up, but it actually is the particle size of a number of viruses. And so you're looking at 60 to 125 nanometers. And if people don't know that, a nanometer is 10 to the minus 9 meters, and this is one tiny particle. And so whatever the 2 or 3 different masks you see being worn, be it cloth or the paper fabric, there's little to zero chance that mask is doing anything in arresting any of these minute particles from going back and forth. And so I've addressed the whole issue. We got a 90% positive response as this story went across Canada. And the handful of negative responses, I immediately put out a video which includes the CDC document and the addressing the inefficacy and possible dangers of these masks. And it's supported by a pulmonary expert as well, plus 2 OSHA experts who are the ones who actually instruct doctors on positive airway and integrity of airways. So that's pretty much where I've gone with that one. And it's pretty hard to dispute when you understand the details of virus particle size.
Dave, can you help me understand that size? So imagine I've got a bowl of Jell-O and I try to throw it through a chicken wire fence that's 3 feet away from me. Or is it like throwing a Jell-O through a wide open barn door?
Well, it's hard to get a appreciation on that, but I mean, I've heard it referenced before with a chain link fence and a mosquito. And now that's an arbitrary term. I can tell you that a smoke particle that they blow through the masks, Dr. Ted Noel does that, and that is referenced on my video as well. You'll get a lot more information off the video with regards to the particulars of this issue, but you will find Dr. Ted Noel blowing vape smoke through a mask. And in that case, you're looking at a particle of around half a micron, which is 10 to the minus 6. So you're looking at about close to 1,000 multiple difference in between what a micron is and a nanometer.
And I don't doubt what you're saying. And I think actually the best advice, or let's say the most authoritative advisor in our country, Dr. Theresa Tam, has also said that masks in order to be effective, should have 3 layers, and 2 layers of some cotton or paper, and a third layer of, and I forget the terminology she used, but clearly a 1-layer blue paper surgical mask is not up to her quality standard, and therefore, I've wondered myself if people walking around with less than these 3 layers are in fact doing any good. But maybe you could comment on that, or how did you feel, or what did you think about Dr. Tam's recent advice about the 3-layer mask?
I would only suggest this, that given the difficulty of building a screen that's down to that size, being absolutely impossible, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 10 layers is still going to be a difficult task. You've seen fine screens. You've seen very, very fine sieves. We have some here that we've used in our pottery days. Extremely fine sieves. Those are way too big for screening this stuff out. You're looking pretty much at a HEPA system, if you're familiar with that. That's pretty much the only thing that's going to do it, and that's no small task to be breathing through a HEPA system. You'll see those in industrial areas, and certainly at your USAMRID, places like that where you absolutely have to get down to that level. It's just not something that's possible on a $5 mask or a $500 mask, really.
So Dave, and thanks for letting us pepper you with questions where I'm trying to think of, people watching this and saying, why don't you ask this, or why don't you ask that? And so I've heard it mentioned, talking about the mosquito through a chain link fence, that people make the point, well, but the mosquitoes are all riding on basketballs, and the basketballs are the saliva particles, or, like the moisture in your breath, and that the mask is pretty effective at catching those, which then limits the amount of actual COVID virus particles that end up, beyond your immediate face, I guess. What's the kind of, how do you speak to that?
Pretty effective does not equal absolute.
Okay.
And if we're led to believe that this is as dangerous as they say, then I would pretty much want absolute if it were me.
Okay. So getting, knocking down 90% of those particles, or 60% or 70%, is your assertion the way that it's being demonstrated, or the way that it's being purported to us, is like it's completely effective and therefore it's giving people a false sense of security, or some effectiveness isn't better than no effectiveness, if that makes sense?
Well, it sounds a little weak at best to all of a sudden try to get 7 billion people to run around with a mask overnight. I understand where they're coming from, but it may be useful to move in a different direction. You had a guest on recently. His name was Chris Norman, and he coincidentally delivered to us a statement that is actually at the epicenter of this whole situation we're in. And the situation we're in happens to be almost the greatest disparity that we're dealing with on the planet at this time, even though people don't understand what it is. You also mentioned, Steve, to Chris, how is it that no doctor has come forth to tell us the truth about this situation, if you recall? And I could give you 4 or 5 doctors right now who have come forth to exactly address that situation.
Dave,
But if
just
you like, I could remind you of what Chris's statement was, and we could move in that direction.
please, I'm trying to remember the context there, and if you could help me just remind me of that context.
It's very close to this.
Okay.
Chris said, this is such an odd situation in the ER, in the ER where he works. It's such an odd situation. You got to love it. And then he went on to say that here's this virus. It's not even alive, yet it's destroying so many lives. I got confirmation from a lady, a health professional, just in this room the other day, again, from the health profession in the local Okanagan here, and she confirmed what Chris said, that it seems to be well recognized within the medical community that the virus isn't alive. So what's pertinent in that statement is, if it's alive, if it's not alive, it does not have the ability to procreate. It can't generate its own heat. It doesn't have its own biochemical systems. So if it therefore is not alive, it's absolutely impossible that it's the causation to destroy so many lives. And as luck would have it, we do have doctors out there who are exactly answering that question. You have a paradox there. You clearly have a paradox. And for instance, Dr. Zach Bush, who's triple board certified, has a team of researchers behind him. He perfectly answers that question, which should be disturbing to people because there's no sense in it. It can't be destroying lives if it can't procreate.
Dave, can I just ask for clarification then?
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible that the virus that is alive and traveling through the population is that much more deadly, or is it that there's just so much of this virus that is out there and not alive but showing up in tests that is that why we see so many cases with so few fatalities? Or can you, I'm not sure, I'm like, and by the way, I appreciate all of this technical information we're getting. It's some of it's probably over my head and I'm trying to follow along, so I don't know if my question is well formed, but hopefully you can navigate that.
Well, there's nothing wrong with your question whatsoever. It's just that you've covered some very precarious ground in that you mentioned testing. Well, that in itself is under huge debate right now because there's a lawyer named Rainer Filmick in Germany who is actually litigating right now that he says is the largest lawsuit in human history. And it is precisely leading off with the claim that the reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction test is incapable of providing the information regarding causation. And the inventor of the test was Dr. Kerry Mullis, who actually first claimed and spoke forward that that test is not to be used for that. It's a surrogate test only that only reveals various proteins within the body. There's no causative relationship that can be produced by that test. And so the fact that that is now coming out in international courts is going to cause a bit of a disturbance alone. And so that was only one part of your question. I don't know what else you want me to answer on that particular one. But it's a very weak foundation at this point as far as testing goes, because cases essentially don't really mean much. And if you actually hear some of the news reports, you will hear terms like false positives and false negatives as well that go along with that.
Yeah, here in Ontario, I forget her title exactly, maybe the deputy health officer, or I forget her name, but it went viral 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago when she said in a press conference with Doug Ford that she said if you're testing in, and I don't know what this had to do with anything, but she said if you're testing in a population with low rates of COVID, that's the part I couldn't understand, like why would that was relevant. But then she went on, and the sentence finished with, "You will get false positives almost half the time," and there isn't enough reporting about that or good research, it seems to me, about that. That's not a question, sorry. So there's a lot of technical information here. I'd love to maybe ask on behalf of Steve. Steve, are you getting a sense of why Dave has taken this road? And
Well, I think so. Is it your assertion that, for me, early on, and coincidentally, it was about 7 months ago, maybe 6 months ago, as COVID started to become more prevalent in social media and in general in the media, as we started to see more movement towards widespread lockdowns, et cetera. I made a post kind of flippantly and said, I think masks is going to be my hill that I will die on. I think, there's all kinds of little things that I can't control and the government's deciding to do. And I think masks is just going to be the one thing, like no one's going to make me wear a mask. And so that's just what, that's what I'll decide to draw the line in the sand at. And then it wasn't more than 4 or 5 weeks later that I was like, wrote another post, said, well, I want to go to Hawaii, and if they make me wear a mask on the plane, I'm probably going to wear the mask, just because I want to get to Hawaii, which I had to cancel anyway because it's not worth going right now with the mandates that they've got there. But now I wear a mask frequently, not frequently, but often, going to shop get groceries or go pick up something from the hardware store or whatever. And so I have a lot of sentimentality that flows your direction in general. But is it your assertion that COVID doesn't exist as like to me, it seems fairly clear from the CDC data, and I'm not sure if it's exactly the same tables that you were referring to, but that there has been about somewhere between 250 and 300,000 too many people pass away this year in the United States. It's very steady, the line that, the death rate in the United States, it's very predictable over the last, several years, if not 20, 30 years, in a very narrow corridor. And this year in 2020, that's busted out of that corridor by, 8 or 10, 12%. And it's at least 250,000 people, whether it's been correctly labeled, whether it's suicide versus COVID, whether it's something else, to me, it seems pretty clearly out of the normal. And so it just follows that there probably is a fairly serious virus going around that's taking a significant amount of lives, enough to make a pretty significant blip in history. But I certainly have a lot of reservations about the COVID mitigation measures that have been taken and the mandating that's happening. But I'd be interested to know, do you agree with that general premise, or do you not?
Well, again, I would go back to the CDC figures, as long as we can all agree that they are the possibly authority on disease in the world. And so when you go there, whatever conflicting information may come from that, including whatever the health authorities are producing in our province here in British Columbia, a person has a choice to make. And when you look at some of these numbers, for instance, since the whole thing started, in other words, February to October inclusive, according to this document, in age 5 to 14 years old, you have a 1.7 in 10 million chance of death. And so when you look at stuff like that, I mean, it's hard to get serious about whatever blips are happening anywhere. And so realistically, what we're down to here is each and every individual satisfying themselves on where the proper data is. And I can't go any further than point them to the precise figures within the CDC website itself. The interesting thing about this is that there's two sides of this discussion with regards to our sign. The first side is there any relevancy to what's going on? And we've already talked about the frailty of the testing itself and the numbers. The flip side of that makes me stand with my my claim is founded in being an EMT, and I can't in good conscience go against the principles to preserve life when I understand that there is also harm being caused, and that's the second side of this story. And so I could direct people to my video that directly, that addresses this issue. I could say at this point that there are two issues. Number one is the alteration in the rebreather volume of CO2 and exhaust gases. You're actually altering the rebreather volume, and an 8-hour day, that becomes a significant effect when you're talking about a sensitive volume that's been developed over your whole life. So that being altered is a stark condition in itself. And then the second thing that goes along with that is that you're creating a moist, warm environment, which happens to be exactly what a bacterial colonization would want. Warm, moist, and dark. And so you've got a couple of situations that are playing against it. And there was a report out of Central Alberta where a woman who was pregnant had to be induced into a coma with a C-section occurring because of bacterial pneumonia, in spite of the fact that she followed all the guidelines. Well, bacterial pneumonia is something that you would expect from creating an artificial bacterial colonization right outside your mouth. I had a gentleman in the gift shop here just the other day, and we had a long conversation, and I could see his mask heaving during the conversation as he was pulling in through his mouth anything that happened to be collecting in that mask. Now, even if he had been guided to breathe through his nose, you have a better filtration system through your nose. But I mean, that's to be cognizant of that and try and make that happen is, again, that's a difficult procedure if you're going to strap something on for 8 hours a day.
I'd like to add to this. There's two anecdotes I can share. One was a man I was speaking with last week. I know him very well. And he's a musician. He sings for a living. And he said to me he's quite enjoyed wearing the mask because he has noticed that it has kept his throat and his vocal cords moist. Like, he has noticed it. And this is a man who notices such things. So this is a guy that, when traveling from Ontario to Saskatchewan to perform, knows that when you arrive in Saskatchewan and the humidity is below 20%, he has to take extra precaution. This is a person who notices and is very sensitive to such things. And another anecdote is a teacher that I was listening to an interview yesterday with Tamara, and I'm just forgetting her name, but an independent journalist, and she was interviewing a teacher in Ontario, and he talked about kids that are in his classroom. So I think he teaches in elementary, grade 4 or higher. It didn't seem to me he was teaching younger grades, but it's certainly elementary school. And he said that there are often, he said, he wishes he could tell the kids to take the mask off particularly in gym class. And it's crazy to me that in schools we're telling kids they have to wear masks in gym class, but adults in a gym, when you go and work out, the rule is to take the mask off. And it appears that one of those rules is nonsense. And what I'm hearing from you, Dave, is that it's nonsensical to, particularly in a circumstance where you're physically active and breathing heavy, to then put a mask on. There's harm to be done. Oh, the other thing the other anecdote from this teacher, this is a person now who has worn a mask every day, multiple masks per day since September, or maybe even before the summer months. And he said sometimes he'll put a mask on and take a breath and then have a coughing fit because he knows he's breathed something in, like fiberglass particles, or some I don't know what the masks are made of. Those blue surgical masks, Dave. Well, what are they made of? And is it possible that there's debris that people are breathing in when they put a brand new mask out of a package?
I have heard that you could inhale fibers, but more pertinent to what you just said is the natural propensity to expel toxins and bacteria and parasites and whatever else you may have inhaled. So whether you're coughing or sneezing, that's meant to expel things out of your mouth. And so if you're wearing a mask, what are you doing? Not everything again is going to go through the mask. You're going to be whatever you're meant to eliminate from your body is going to be captured within that net. And there again, it's ripe and ready for you to be re-inhaling at that point. So,
I was thinking, Steve, it might be useful to bring on screen, some of because Dave mentioned the poster. Is now a good time, or do you want to continue down this line of questioning here?
No, I think that's good. So one thing I just wanted to mention, so it's a little bit of an aside, but from a freedom of choice perspective, one thing that we've heard a lot is, a private company can require that you wear a mask to come in, and that if that's on private property, whether it be Walmart or Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever, if they're requiring, then that's within their rights to require that. So I thought it was novel, the approach that you've taken, said, well, then this is my private property and my private business enterprise, and so I'm going to require or encourage that people don't wear a mask. And I think I just like some dissent. I think it's encouraging to have dissent. I think it's important to have conversation. So commend you for that, and be interested to know what kind of legal backlash you've had, if any, or are you not on anyone's radar yet?
We've had a visit from WorkSafe BC. The first visit, I wasn't there. My wife received the visit, and we don't have any employees. So, and we also have absolutely zero safeguards according to this situation. And so he came and was very friendly, and he left with no problems. The second time he came was merely to warn us that he's been getting angry complaints about us, and so he had the good, out of the goodness of his heart, came to warn us about that. And so it's important for all of us to realize, those of us who maybe have a little bit of more insight as to this situation, it's important for us to realize the panic and fear that's out there, that makes it look like we're just non-caring about that situation, which is absolutely not the case. It's just a difficult situation to resolve when I understand that there's so many different problems, both with wearing it and with the foundation of it needing to wear it, and also resolve that with trying to not breach the fear situation that's out there. And so in effect, my sign is to stimulate conversation and possibly education. And so obviously I've gone to a length here with the information, and it's all free, and that's what we encourage, because the only way to bridge that gap, it's not really right for us to just clamp our information away, but we have to be respectful of those who are scared, scared to death, and so that's what this is all meant to be, is to stimulate the conversation and move the conversation to a higher level of understanding.
Dave, I'm
Thanks.
sorry to hear that, and glad to hear that the officer stopped by to tell you and warn you of some of the complaints that they've been getting. On that note, and Steve, maybe you haven't known this, but Kimberly Newdorf that we talked with just a few weeks ago, Dave, on this show, she's actually been now the victim of I don't know what to call it, like local terrorism. There are people showing up at her home. So Kimberly, she's a mom, and she has organized people in her community to speak out against government overreach, and she's calling for better data and fact-based decision making and independent local decision making, local to her family, and the rights to do so. But generally speaking, I don't think there's anything wrong with her position, and I don't think has put anybody in danger. And yet there are these people showing up to her home in the middle of the night. She has video of it, and they've damaged her property. They're shaking on her windows and doors and walls, and it's just absurd what's happening. Anyway, what I'd like to do is bring on screen this image that we could then speak to it, because you mentioned it earlier, Dave, and this is this is what hit the news, and this is part of the reason that I wanted to learn more about what you're doing out there and wanted to talk with you. We can't quite read it because of the resolution. Could you just please tell whoever's watching precisely what this thing says, and when did it go up? And I'd love if you could share some background about the feedback you've gotten, positive or negative, maybe examples of that.
Sure. As best as I can remember, it says, "We love you and respectfully appeal by way of thousands of support documents that you consider the harm you may be causing yourself and others by your actions in wearing a mask. We therefore encourage that mask wearing is prohibited in this establishment." So like I said, I've done a fair bit of research, and if I thought that I was causing any harm by doing this, this wouldn't be occurring right now. And so if I could address what you said earlier about having nasty comments or whatever. Number one, they're very few, and number two, it's not a concern, because in my life, what I've learned was, if you arm yourself with information on a topic, it almost creates a little bit of an insulator, because in order to get through that, a person has to show up with with information, and nobody has done that. Anybody can go around and threaten people or be angry, but we're entering a new paradigm on this planet where violence and anger and warfare and such that's old news, and you see millions gathering in love and peace. That is the new paradigm, and so there's not much energy behind spreading fear and anger anymore, and so it's not a concern for me. I'll take it by day, and I will stand by my truth and do what I can to improve the situation.
Dave, I want to ask you some details about this news article, if that's all right. Like this, it's published by Shelby Tom, who I presume is known to you. Did she speak with you directly, or a phone call, or did she show up, or how did that work?
Phone interview.
A phone interview. Okay, so then from the phone interview, she highlighted. I have to admit, for Global News, I found that this article was fairly written, where much of the work of Global News, I think, is heavily biased. There is some bias in here, but did you feel? How did you feel about the article once it was published? Did she represent fairly what you had talked about with her, or not?
I'll just say for starters that I tend to not look at anything negative because that's bad energy put in that direction. But my wife was quite concerned that the article was heavily biased, and there again, I wasn't too concerned. So I eventually did go and look at the article, and I understood that she got, she got this point, she got that point, she got that point. I don't remember exactly what they were, but the points that I wanted to get across are within that article. And those that saw the article and also felt the same way my wife did, who also understand the situation, they see through that. So they saw through the bias. In fact, any bias in that regard turns against the reporter because it's clear that they're trying to take something away from the situation. But all my points were covered in that article, so I'm happy with that.
And so there was a photograph of your poster. There's a photo here of the wall in your gift shop. It's the Truth Center, I understand.
Correct.
And then there was a related video about vandalism that took place at a nearby Kelowna. I want to breathe fresh air. Obviously they were associating what you've done with that activism. I thought that was kind of unfair, but there it is. And then there's a photo here of your shop. And there's really not much more to say here, except just, I think, interesting to notice just the sheer volume of advertising that Global News has on their pages. It's amazing how much advertising they require, even after the subsidies they get from our Canadian government. Do you want to? Is anything more to say there, and while I have the web browser up, do you want to show the documents that you have?
Well, if you want to dig a little deeper into this, which will be moving in the direction of Zach Bush's research, there's this great disparity that's within the planet, and confronting us now. It all comes down to again, something that maybe people haven't heard about, but there's a reason they haven't heard about it. You guys are familiar with the censorship and control of media and such, but what it all comes down to is the difference between what they call germ theory and versus terrain theory, and that's the thing that's going to be coming out of this whole program as we find the crumbling of the old situation occurring. It's going to lead straight into this process. Essentially, I've kind of lived my life naturally by not aligning with germ theory and more so with terrain theory. And if you're not familiar with those two concepts,
I'm not.
One is by placing nefarious attributes onto a particle and calling it a pathogen. What's coming out now is we're going to find that virus particles are actually adaptogenic. And so this is dipping into a situation where we're going to need another 6 days to talk about. But that's at least a touch in that direction to understand the implications and the far-reaching benefits that will come out of this situation, albeit in a snail's pace, and that's due to the cover-up and censorship that's out there now. Did that make sense?
A little bit. Was I reading between the lines correctly? Talking about is the theory somewhat along the lines of every germ, every pathogen or living organism that's out there has a place in nature or in the natural order of things, and to, you know, set aside one or the other that does a certain thing and call it a pathogen. I mean, just basically like the mistakes we've made over the last centuries, where there was a time when we pulled out organs or did bloodletting or whatever, because that was our understanding of science at the time. And so are you talking about like a more refined way of looking at the balance of all these different organisms?
You're absolutely extremely close on what you just said. Let me put it a different way. Zach Bush points out that there's 10 to the 31 viral particles around us at any given time. Put another way, we are inhaling and ingesting trillions of viral particles, bacteria, parasites, fungal spores, even mold. There's no way around it. We've been doing it for centuries. We're going to continue to do it. And it's by the very nature of our own integrity within our own system that lives in a symbiotic relationship with these items. That's reflected in the more recent characterization of the microbiome, and even things like parasites and things like that we've been led to believe are nasty and horrific little things, pathogens. Zach Bush points out that you've got a little worm living underneath your eyelid, and if that guy wasn't there, you wouldn't be as integral as you are now. And if you want to go even further, you can take something like a book like this, which is 777 pages of research, which is backed by 89 books as well, and thousands of medical and independent case study documents. So the information is there, and that's just one. There's all sorts of information out there that's completely putting this thing to bed, in a convincing manner based on the integrity of the research. But yeah, you pretty much nailed it right there. That's it.
That's something that I certainly have had concern about from day one, is what is the next step? We make it through this COVID and get on the other side of that, whatever that means, everyone's vaccinated or whatever that, to get people to have this general feeling of security back. And then I wonder, can we ever reclaim that sense of security pre-COVID? In just like what you're saying, I mean, if we want to start thinking about all of the things that we ingest and all of the germs that are floating around us and go into our bodies, once COVID is no longer as significant a concern as it is or is thought to be, are we going to find another boogeyman, and do masks become the general order of things? And even beyond masks, do we just get to be a society that becomes paralyzed by fear of what's around us? And when we throw that out, we throw the baby out with the bathwater, and end up causing ourselves long term potentially to become generally less healthy and generally less robust and able to fight disease as a human race. I'm not sure that that's being addressed or thought about in some of the knee-jerk reactions of, we have to fight this thing, we have to beat this thing. But again,
Yeah.
not a question. Sorry.
No, I'd like to address that. That's excellent. So there's two things about that. The first thing is that you talk about germs and everything. We've had this 130-year horror about these little particles that are invading our body. And what I tried to allude just previously was they're a natural part of our body. And when we start to transform our thought process to something with a little higher level of truth, that fear all of a sudden is removed from the equation, because it's a natural part of our environment. As Zach Bush points out, that the virome, as he calls it, is exactly there to update our genome. It's highly relevant information that has always been there, and indeed, if it wasn't, we wouldn't be here. So that's how integral that is to our system when you actually see it from that point of view. And then the other thing to address in this situation, which hasn't been, is, well, if this particle isn't doing harm to us, what is? And so again, that's addressed in that book that I just showed you. And what it is that that we're living in an increasingly toxic environment. And so the cellular response that was once thought to be a viral or a pathogenic invasion is now merely a response to a toxic environment. And that's more clearly defined again with people like Dr. and Andy Kaufman, who is illustrating for us the dispersal of exosomes from the cell. They're emitted from the cell as a response to a toxic environment within the situation. And so there's all sorts of information out there that is redefining, the uncertainties that are now falling apart with things like the German lawsuit.
I want to ask sorry, go ahead, Steve.
No, I've monopolized the conversation a little bit.
I have a question there then, just as a layman, based on what I've just heard here. I once thought, just a number of months ago, and in conversation with a friend, I wondered if there may be benefit in contracting COVID at this time if our immune system and is capable of fighting it, that perhaps COVID 2026, if such a thing happens in our near future, that the people who have contracted COVID-19 and successfully fought it will have that much easier time with the next one. Is there any truth to that at all? Or is that just an absurd presumption to make?
Well, the reason why it carries any weight whatsoever is because we've had 130 years thinking along those terms. It's just like, I don't know if this is a relevant example, but hate does not exist. And people say, well, sure it does. You see it all around you. But it only exists because we all agree it does. And so by the same token, when you understand that a virus is not a virus because it's not alive, it's now a viral particle, which is merely a small representation of a few genes, not enough genes to even cause a problem. So a person is going to need to move fully into that idea, at which point the whole idea of fighting anything becomes a faded notion of the past. And if you want to look at it in a different way, personally, I don't own an immune system. We live in a symbiotic relationship, bringing on viral particles, releasing viral particles, updating our genome, creating a stronger situation because of it. And what we once thought of was a cold or a flu is now redefined as a response to a toxic situation. And like I say, I mean, I'm not necessarily a professional in that regard, but I've done the research, and Don Lester and David Parker have done the research and excruciatingly described what I've just talked about. So people don't need to take my word for it, and I understand if they don't. But the information is out there, and I would urge anybody who is curious about it to delve into it, because there's a total redefinition going on.
Well, that's certainly interesting. I would want to know more about that. For example, in a toxic situation or a toxic circumstance that's causing my body to respond in a way that is uncomfortable, let's say, maybe I have difficulty breathing for a few days or a cough or whatever, my body's ability to heal through that, to me, there's a word for that called immunity. But if there's a redefinition of things happening, I'm intrigued. I'm interested to know more about that. Hey, Dave and Steve, why don't we share the documents that Dave has curated for the Truth Center? Because Dave, you've been talking, about a number of these documents, and why don't we show them on screen? People know where to find them. Would that be all right?
Could I just add one more point and address what you just said, because it's important?
Yeah, sure.
So I mentioned that we're dealing with germ theory versus terrain theory, and I can strengthen that position you were talking about, because when you understand that it's terrain theory, what that means is it's the integrity and cleanliness is not the right word. Integrity is a better word. When you take care of the integrity of your system, then what you used to think of as an immune response is now merely just a more efficient way of handling a toxic situation. And so when you move into that and understand that we may have created a toxic situation for ourselves by the myriad of toxins that are present now, which includes your household chemicals, your food additives, which are endless, including the ones that have been directly a problem, such as some of the artificial sweeteners and stuff. And so it's a total redefinition of it. And when you understand that the integrity of your body is more important than anything else right now, then the toxic overload becomes less of an issue, because you've optimized your ability to deal with it.
Hey guys, I'm going to just disappear and bring my dog over. He's making some noise in the background. You carry on without me. I'll be back in 30 seconds.
Did that make sense, Steve?
Yeah, it's interesting. The word that comes to mind is the arrogance of, and I don't want to say, I think there's a lot of great, well-intentioned scientists and practitioners and medical professionals, but there's an arrogance that comes along with, we've figured out how to kill this germ, or how to have some sort of specific effect on some specific, combination of compounds or whatever within the body, and to call that a cure, because the same scientists and the same practitioners, I think, would pretty readily agree that we've only scratched the surface. When we talk about the genome, when we talk about genetics, when we talk about, even just all of the theories of the very small in our universe, we don't know a lot fundamentally about how all that works. And so we find this one little piece that seems to work, and then we want to just turn that into a cure-all, like we've figured it out. We now understand. And there's people that spend lifetimes, coming up with those little nudges that maybe nudge something in one direction or the other. And then, but at the end of the day, you can still have somebody that just intuitively picks the right combination of lifestyle, of diet and spiritual work or whatever, that ends up with much better results than the combination of those little nudges that science has given us. And so it's hard to have a conversation like that about intuition, spirituality, holistic types of things with someone who's devoted their lives to understanding one specific part extremely well, because I don't know if they can help but talk down to you and be arrogant in the way that they address those kinds of theories. I don't know. That's a big, gigantic kettle of fish there that maybe I'm poking around in. I don't know.
I have two things to say about that, because it's an extremely interesting situation that you bring up. And just generally speaking, if you keep your ear to the ground, you're going to find a crumbling of foundations, not just within what we're talking about, but you're going to find a crumbling through a broad range of situations and industries, if you like, due to the fact of that arrogance, which you could also term as kind of an establishment groupthink mentality. And so I have an example here for you that gets out of our topic. And this is a very recent friend of mine who is a physicist. And he put this book together here. And as it turns out, coincidentally enough, this book is about crumbling the structure of physics to a large degree. He was always a black sheep. He actually got thrown out of a classroom because what he was saying didn't go along with the narrative, even though he was right. And so it's a curious thing right now, that this crumbling going on, which is not only bringing us to a higher level of truth, but it's also addressing that arrogance that you're talking about, in that there's a foundationless situation going on that's allowing for this crumbling. And the second thing I wanted to say, I think this addresses what you just said. I have a document here. It's called Cure Any Disease. And there's a British doctor, his name is Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, and him, along with a San Francisco gentleman, Dr. Dale Bredesen, combined are addressing a situation that is heading towards bankruptcy, is the way Dr. Chatterjee puts it, in Britain. And he's taken a completely different approach, where he has put together 8 points to bring a person to health, and he's doing it. He's done it. He's taken a diabetic and completely moved them into a situation of health by addressing these 8 points. And it goes along with the terrain theory. You're improving and addressing situations that are creating a negative condition that we used to think of as a disease, where in fact it's a toxic situation. So that document is on the Truth Center tab there, if anybody's interested. But it's a very clearly defined 8 points that he and Dr. Bredesen are using. And then I've added 3 points, which I think are critical to the whole process. But there again, there's interesting things going on, and you made some relevant points.
Well, thanks, Dave. I'm satisfied with
Sure.
the conversation, David. I'll let you finish up. We've taken some time here.
So we've gone into a realm here where we're addressing, or at least highlighting, that there are many unknowns. There are some knowns, however, and I think, Dave, you've curated a number of resources that people might be interested in seeing. So I'm just going to bring on screen for a moment this website of yours. So for anyone that's paying attention, this is sorry that it's so small, but it's oneeyedbudgie.com, which is the name of your shop, One Eyed Budgie. This is a photograph of it here, and in the menu, of course, you've got some photos and a story, but 3 pages here that you call the Truth Center. And I presume, just can you clarify, these are the documents that are behind you on the wall, is that right?
They're mostly comprised of the upper documents. I have a multitude of documents down below that I no longer have any room for, because obviously information keeps coming, and we should always be feasting on information to improve the situation. So yeah, most of the top documents are on there. And there's also some assistance with regards to your rights in this issue, your Charter of Rights, your Canadian human rights, and the emergency order from BC.
Thank you. And just to be clear, these aren't so these are some documents you've produced, but you're also not the author of this research. You're pulling from others who have done such research. Is that right?
Most of these documents, I am the author of it, as it shows in the document,
Okay.
and I've referenced my material wherever and whenever I could to direct people in that way.
So here's the emergency order. I see that here. You talked about a few doctors and authors this evening with us. Those are also referenced here. Here, by the way, are some. Two additional documents. Vaccines revealed, cognitive distance definition. So that resource, by the way, we'll make sure to put into the comments or below the video, and direct you toward Dave's website. I'm trying to think carefully if there's anything else I want to really ask you. There is actually. So my original question to you was, is there anything that you could, that you would hear from people who have currently a contrary position about mask wearing, that would persuade you? Like, what evidence could you? This is the old steelman argument, right? I'm not religious, and someone is religious, and they tell me, and I say, well, if I observed a miracle, then maybe I'd be persuaded. But what would you need to see? What evidence would you need to be presented with, if any?
Well, that's a fair question, because any information always has to hold up, of course, as you would know.
Yeah.
But when you look at the roots of the situation that we're involved with, you will see ulterior agendas as part of that birth of the situation. For instance, 130 years ago, with Louis Pasteur, the whole notion of a virus or an invading pathogen was made up before the advent of electron microscopy, so they couldn't even see what they were claiming, and it was born out of a scientific and political fraud. And so when you have a foundation like that, it's pretty hard to address information that could come out of that. And again, I'm making a claim, and so a person can look into the research of Dr. Stefan Lanka, and if you don't want to go straight for the research yourself. But there's an additional thing I can say to that, and that's that Pasteur's notes were eventually given up by the latest living male heir, and I believe he sent them to Princeton University, at which point a professor published them. And so there is relevant backed up data to allude to that point. So I don't know if that completely addresses what you were saying, but when something is built on a weak foundation like that, what information can be brought forth to address it?
Interesting. Then maybe another last thought or question I have. Has anybody who has visited your shop or sent mail to you, hate mail, or anyone who has complained about your stance, do you know of anyone that has changed their stance based on dialogue with you or the information that you've shared?
I can't say, because nobody has come forward with that, but I can say that we've had people come in here who intuitively knew that there was an issue here, that there was some problem going, other than what meets the eye. And I know we've helped them move in a direction of a higher level, of understanding. I can go far as to say that, but that's about it.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. Steve, I don't have more for Dave at this point. Dave, it's been really great to talk with you and hear your perspective.
You've been generous with your time, and it's been enjoyable to kind of broaden a little bit and just give you an opportunity to explain some of these things. I appreciated the conversation.
Dave, could you just maybe think for a moment if there's anything else you'd want to say or tell us about before we exit?
Well, there actually is, because this is, from a bird's eye view, this is barely what we understand it is. And what I'm not saying that to be pretentious, but what I understand this is has taken my wife and I into a completely different realm, so to speak. This realm that we have moved into, or this position that we've moved into, is precisely to address the situation that may be answered by this question. What is going to happen when the mass public is no longer able to ignore the truth? And I would advise that people don't take that lightly. And indeed, what my wife and I have moved into is a situation to exactly address that. It's nice to have a foundation of knowledge. It's nice to call out a wrong here and there, but this is a much greater story. And from my point of view, this is the most critical thing we have to deal with. And that's why I mentioned that when people support, okay, do we all understand what cognitive dissonance is?
I do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when a person is in that position, the ego basically forces them into a corner. You can't defend a position with no foundation and not be backed into a corner. And that very as you know, with cognitive dissonance, that very friction that's set up within their mind in dealing with this new situation, that's unfortunately a very fragile and explosive, at the same time, explosive situation. So like I said, our position has moved into that. I will still be here to talk to people if they need some support on higher levels of understanding. But we've set up a Zoom session on Saturday nights to exactly address the situation that's about to occur when nobody can, when you can no longer ignore, the truth. And it's well founded in the research of Dr. David Hawkins, who was one of the biggest psychiatric practices in New York at one time. But he did way more than that. Yeah, and you'll see that in my videos if you're interested. It's founded in a lot of his research, and that's what we're using as our method of choice to address the situation that may be impending in the near future.
Dave, thanks for that. It reminds me, Steve, of the conversation we had with Brian Hyde. Dave, we were talking with Brian Hyde not long ago, particularly about media and its corruption, and in that conversation, without saying it explicitly, I think we did reach this point in our conversation where we all agreed and understood that there will be a great reckoning when the public realizes the corruption in media and they, like, just imagine for the moment that every journalist tomorrow started telling fact-based accounts of what they observe, rather than the spin and the bias that we currently see. If there was just no lying anymore in journalism, the public wouldn't know what to do with that. It would just be a shock to this, all of our societal systems that are currently based on this narrative that is largely portrayed by mainstream media. And I know maybe that's not what you're talking about in terms of media. Maybe you're speaking of something more medical related or health related or spiritual related. But anyway, I thought it was interesting that our conversation with Brian was related to that. Steve, do you recall? Have I mischaracterized that?
No, it's again, I'm a give people the benefit of the doubt kind of person, and so I don't know that I don't feel like even the corruption in media comes from a place of malintent. I think there's some cognitive dissonance there. I think there's there's certainly just some natural bias there. And we live in a complex world. Maybe we always have, but I would posit that it's become more complex the more we scratch that surface, and the more we understand and then think we understand, and as we explore further and further, and then the access to the information is so prevalent right now, certainly more than it has been, and that it just makes it complex. And so, to say we turn on the TV tomorrow and all of a sudden all of the news outlets are telling the truth, well, what exactly does that mean? I think it would be shocking, but I'm not sure that that's one thing for every person. It's interesting. It's interesting conversations. Yeah.
So what you said, David, is precisely what I was talking about. That's a perfect characterization of the explosion that is about to occur. And as we move into that situation, it is important for us to realize that the power of love and forgiveness and integrity is the only thing that's strong enough to mitigate that situation that's coming up. And so those of us that are able to grasp the situation, clearly we don't live in fear because there's nothing to fear. And as long as we're here to provide that support, then that's the best we can do to mitigate that situation as people back themselves into a corner.
So here's what I'm going to do. Following our video here, I'll make sure to publish some of the links that you shared with me prior to our discussion. You mentioned is it the Saturday Zoom call that you host? Is it Saturdays?
Saturdays, 6 o'clock, 6 p.m. Pacific time.
Pacific
9
time,
p.m.
and so I'll make sure that people have access to that if they want to look that up and find more information. Thanks very much, Dave, for being with us and accepting our invitation. It's been really nice to hear from you, and I've certainly learned that there are many avenues for exploration here that I hope to do in the future. What we'll do next is I'm going to take you off the screen, by the way, and then Steve and I are just going to briefly reflect on the conversation we've had with you and some of the things we've learned. Meanwhile, you're welcome to either exit or mute. Just be aware that when I take you off screen, we're still going to hear you if you're talking or making noise. So do please mute or exit. And I'll be in touch in the next few days as we publish this video also at YouTube and at fundamentalfreedoms.locals.com.
Great. I'd just like to say in closing that I appreciate what you two gentlemen are doing. And as I mentioned to Steve prior to this interview, don't diminish your characterization of a great deal of the problems that we have, because that's an amazing thing, even to recognize what's going on at a time when everything is so buried. And so what you guys are doing is a huge part of the crumbling of this foundation by the very virtue of your acts.
Well, thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure speaking with you.
Have a great night, Dave.
Yeah,
See you.
thank you.
Well, what are your thoughts, Steve?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I didn't know him. I met him tonight, and so speaking with him, he's definitionally a conspiracy theorist in in a lot of ways. Like, when you listen to so much of the content, and then at times there was things that he said that sounded very clairvoyant to me, and that just struck home, and I think, as we talk about fundamental freedoms, and as I study more about the founding of the United States, the founders, their clairvoyance, their inspiration was these people, minorities, and especially even as David, sorry, uh,
Brian?
no, Peterson, David
Sure.
Peterson? Jordan Peterson. Oh, I don't know why I had a brain block there. But anyway, I apologize, Jordan. Please still come on our show eventually. But as Jordan Peterson has talked about, the ultimate minority of one person, that's what's being protected. With the fundamental freedoms that we have, what's being protected is the opportunity for people with dissenting opinions to have freedom to express them, freedom to act on their perception of reality in some ways. And I mean, in so many ways, right and wrong comes down to majority. When 90 whatever percent of people believe that XYZ are facts, then anybody that believes that ABCD are facts are by definition cranks or weirdos or wrong, and and uh, and they're not always. And that's the type of exploration that needs to happen. That exploration can't happen if we are if our government or our society, if media is in the business of crushing dissent. And as far as the masks go right now, I just think it's, I mean, beyond the efficacy question, beyond, do they work or not? The question is that looking for that universal acceptance, that universal adherence, which I just think is dangerous on its face. And so, no, really interesting conversation. And some things I agreed with, some things I made me feel uncomfortable almost, but made me think ultimately, which is great.
Yeah, made me think a lot also. So he's not a virologist or an epidemiologist or a geneticist, but he's also not a layman in this topic.
No,
He's
no.
I mean, beyond being well read, he's also a career in the medical field. So by that, I presume he knows where to look for sources of information and can filter perhaps better than many to find good information. And then based on that act of curating, he has formed a very educated opinion and position about the efficacy and impact of masks. I'm glad that we were able to speak with Dave. I'm sure in the next few days I'll have more questions come to mind that I wish I would have asked him. This issue, though, of germ theory versus terrain theory, this is honestly the first I've heard of it, so I really don't have any frame of reference to adjudicate its usefulness in my life, or if that should change the way our society responds in a pandemic like this, or if there is such a pandemic happening, based. So Well, one thing I wish maybe I would have asked him, we've got certainly in the United States, there are now plenty of contrary or contrasting examples of government policy. Like Florida took a very different route than California, which took a very different route than Texas, which took a very different route than New York, and even New York City, which is different than the rest of the state. And so it seems to me that there's a variety of policy decisions that we could now study. And a question was raised the other day by Dave Rubin in his one of his direct messages to say, can someone explain this to me? We've got these various policies in play at the moment in various states, and the numbers aren't much different. So, this state that had completely locked down and shut off the businesses and, people forced to wear masks even outdoors and so forth, versus this other state where, no holds barred, everyone's, basically living their lives as though it was 2019 again. And yet the fatality rates, the case rates and so forth really don't appear to be drastically different, where actually you would expect one to be completely lopsided, but they're not. I don't know, I wish I would have asked Dave about that, if he's maybe followed that pattern or has done some research into that pattern or why that pattern exists. Have you done any research about that?
I mean, no, but it's intuitive, right? I mean, that's happening. There's different approaches, and it is largely the same. I mean, there's pockets of worse here or less, infection rate, less deaths, et cetera. But I had a conversation with somebody about that today. We're spending trillions, literally, spending directly or costing ourselves and our economies trillions of dollars with trying to apply universal mandates, universal lockdowns, universal masking, and distancing, et cetera, and we're not, and hanging it all on the idea of we have to follow the science. And we've got 10 months of really good data now that doesn't
Well, I don't know
seem
that it's
like
really good data. I think there's
well,
still a lot of
not
crazy
perfect,
data, but anyway.
But 10 months of history,
Yeah.
at least, and why aren't we working with that? The thing that came up in my conversation was, have you heard the idea that they think that maybe COVID affects certain blood types more than others or whatever? And I go, I don't know whether that somebody just made that up or posted it or whether there's any validity to that. But those are the types of things we ought to be chasing. Like if the idea is we need to really find out what makes this tick and how we can provide information to people that will help them to protect themselves, it seems like that is the kind of thing that needs to be clear, and a lot more clarity on, like Dave alluded to, 3 to 14-year-olds or 5 to 19-year-olds, young adults, toddlers. This is how much risk there is, versus if you're 75 and have, a heart condition or pre-existing asthma condition or something, then this is how much,
Yeah.
And worry you have. And yet that's not being, it's like let's get through this hump of making sure that every last person in North America is wearing a mask religiously, and then we can start to think about how do we actually deal with this, and including the things that Dave's talking about, as far as maybe we're looking at this entirely wrong. Maybe we have a completely incorrect perspective of what's going on here. I thought that the germ versus terrain idea, again, I haven't heard of that just like you, but I mean, why aren't we chasing all of those strings and all of those threads rather
I
than
presume somebody is
completely, on.
But the mainstream isn't. This I want to come back to your fact-based decision-making problem. So Canada just recently, the Canadian federal government has procured, I don't know the exact number, but it's not big. It's less than 500,000 doses of some vaccine, okay, that they want to distribute across the country. What they've decided to do, and what you would think maybe, is they send them to, let's vaccinate everybody that's 70 years or older, because they're the group that's most at risk, apparently. Mm-hmm. But that's not at all what they're going to do. What they're going to do is they're going to send this vaccine to 12 different locations in the country, as yet undisclosed, I think, but I might be wrong about that. And so think about that. And by the way, I think the number is actually 300,000 or less. It's not even 500,000 doses. But so take 300,000, divide that by 12, push that into 12 parts of this giant nation, and not to the most at-risk population, but the general population, it appears, maybe frontline workers, maybe, I don't know, but these are the people not generally at risk. There's no way even herd immunity will be achieved, because we don't have a critical mass in any one region of the country. We have 12 regions that are going to get some number of vaccines. It just seems to me the strategy, now maybe I'm just outright wrong, and the education that I've received in my life has totally failed me, or maybe I'm not such an idiot, and even I can see through this strategy to say, wait a minute, that sounds like a strategy not based on any data that is being published by reputable sources here. So what is going on? It's either absolute incompetence or political pandering, maybe that explains it, or who knows? It's absurd.
I think one
reason.
theory is that arrogance, just the arrogance of a handful of people put in a position to have some effect on a great number of people, and through
they
good
don't want to be
intentions
seen,
or whatever,
yeah.
It's like we need to pull those levers.
They don't want to be
mask,
seen to not distribute it evenly, maybe.
Right. Yeah. In that case, but just like we talk about, and I think we're going to have some great conversations about economics, about some other topics, but it's funny how it keeps boiling back to a similar theme, which is, let people manage themselves. Let people go and encourage it. Encourage that self discovery and self-determination, and rather than
make the best information available as transparent as possible, and educated people, which presumably we are. We've got many years of formal education behind us in this democracy. We should be able to manage and make risk assessments appropriately without putting everyone else at harm. I'm not against wearing a mask if I'm in a population that I understand is at risk, but I am against putting masks on a 5-year-old that is not at risk and sending them into an environment where people are not at risk. This is not the risk category, in a kindergarten classroom. Unless they've got a teacher or a librarian that's 68 years old and has various other health conditions, well, then maybe that 68-year-old needs to be provided for in a different way by their employer. Take them, out of that environment for the time being, or there are ways, it seems to me, that we should be able to mitigate risk for those that are vulnerable. And by the way, Anthony Furey is a journalist in Canada doing some really interesting writing lately about this topic. Anyway, I'd love to have more conversations. We need to get an economist on here. Economist, sorry. And I was thinking it'd be great to talk with someone who is like a COVID zero rallying for absolutely stop the spread. I think I could learn. I want to learn what makes a person like that tick, frankly.
I agree. Yeah. No, it's but I applaud Dave.
Yeah.
And it's I mean, not discouraging necessarily, but well, it is a little discouraging, like what you talked about with Kimberly, our guest from a few weeks ago. Why are people banging on her door and bothering her and
In groups,
terrorizing? I mean,
not just.
hopefully she's not being terrorized, but
Well,
to
it
have
would be
that,
terrifying, wouldn't it?
yeah,
I mean, your family, your children are in the house, and suddenly there's people literally shaking the doors and banging on your
yeah,
garage, and you don't know what motives they have and how far they're going to go, but they're there
yeah,
in a group, and we know that groups can turn into mob mentality in a blink of an eye, and it's terrible that it's happening. I encouraged her to make sure that the police are informed, to which
yeah,
she said, "Oh, do you mean the police that are, trying to lay fines against people that are protesting?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely them, because they need to hold these two competing ideas in their head simultaneously. They've got they think she's the menace, right, for organizing rallies of a few dozen people
yeah,
on a weekend on a beautiful sunny day outdoors. Meanwhile, she's the victim of menacing people, and administrators of her police force, her local police force, have to hold that in their head simultaneously for a while to figure out which one of those ideas has to go. You
yeah.
know, crazy.
Hmm. Well, thanks
Steve,
again,
thanks for the
David.
conversation.
Been interesting, and we'll do it again here shortly.
You bet. So I'm going to close the stream, and thanks to everybody for being here, or tonight or in the future. fundamentalfreedoms.locals.com. You can find us there, and hopefully we can converse. Also, we publish this recording at YouTube. That'll be up in a day or three. Thanks for watching.
Good night.
Good night.